All right, guys, we are here today with Lincoln Stoller, and we are very excited to hear his perspective and the work he's been doing. So we'll give you the floor if you'd like to add anything else to your intro there, Lincoln.
Well, I don't know what my intro said, so let's leave that as a mystery. I have a lot of background and I don't give it to everybody because you know, doesn't mean a lot to some people. Um, right now, I'm I'm never quite sure. Counselor is okay for most people. Therapist is a little sketchy for some. Psychotherapist makes some people nervous. So I generally, and coach is like, makes me think of high school track. So I kind of don't say that too much. But I'm all of those things.
Mm,
And, different people respond to it differently, and different people, I hesitate to use the word need, but okay. If you say you need something, okay, I'll play ball with you. But I'm never quite sure what a person needs or if I should believe them. Well, normally you don't believe people because if they knew everything, they wouldn't come to me for anything. So they have some question, and I guess they think I'm going to answer it. I'm also somewhat ambivalent about charging people. Some people said this should be free, and they agree it should be free. And in a different culture, it might have been free. There'd be the medicine man or, the something, a wise person, but it's not free. So I'm sort of that kind of,
mm.
you know,
The
the people
labels
who
can be
need it most
constricting.
can't pay, right?
Yeah. And that, I mean, to your point, I like, we should just call you the medicine man because what does that really mean? It's like all encompassing, but
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
there's a lot of what you said that resonates already just with how I've experienced it. My role in being in the helping environment. I wish we did have a different culture that allowed everyone to, use medicine men
Mm.
to gain a deeper understanding of themselves, to help them navigate through themselves and their world. But uh yeah, I'm not huge on labels either because they can feel kind of boxy and like people have all these associations and connotations around them. So keeping it flowy, I'm a fan.
Well, medicine women too there's another box.
Yeah,
So
medicine people.
medicine people. Oh, but then, even the word medicine. No, that gets us right to the psychedelics issue
Well, there you go.
because because it's become popular to call psychedelics these days medicines or to somehow refer to them as medicines. And that's another box that I don't think really is entirely accurate. No, I don't think it's even partly accurate. Well, maybe sometimes accurate. It depends, how do you use this stuff? I mean,
Right.
medicines typically weren't medicines, they were active chemicals, and we found a use for them, and then we called them medicines because we saw a disease and they seemed to help. And in the realm of mental illness, which is another box, which is even more sort of sticky,
Yeah.
now to call things medicines for things that never were illnesses, well, it seems like they're often running down what's often the wrong road. So my attitude toward psychedelics is, you know, they're not medicines. They're powerful chemicals, and that's our culture's view of them. Other cultures think that they're powerful spirits or whatever. And some people come to them because they think they're in need of a cure. And in the past, people came to them because they thought they were far out and they were going to, I don't know, expand their minds or entertain themselves or have a great social dance experience. I don't know. And they could be all of those things. My whole attitude toward m- medicine work, I don't know what to call it, is that you pretty much define it in terms of how you approach it. I don't mean me, I mean the client or
Hmm.
something. Um, I typically get a spectrum of people, and some people call themselves ill, or so somebody has a problem. They normally have a problem. Otherwise, why would they talk to me? Well, I mean, why would they pay me to talk to me? So, what's their problem? And they describe their problem. I am hesitant to believe it, but okay, that's their story. And if it's an illness, then I find myself put in a position of an authority. And if it's a um, struggle like a business struggle, situational struggle, then I put on my consulting hat. So I have, you know, 20 or 30 years experience in software as an entrepreneur, and I can play with that hat. But, I met a lot of dysregulated people in business too. They were loath to call themselves ill, but I thought they were pretty out of balance, some of them. Um, it's sort of the nature of business is you take opportunities to the fullest and then you pick up the pieces afterwards after you've made a profit. So my attitude towards psychedelics is, what do you want from them? That's sort of my first question. What do you know about them? What do you want from them? What do you think you're going to get? I'm not that encouraging of newcomers who don't know the answers to those questions. I would say you should have some idea, in spite of the fact that maybe what you think is not going to change the experience for you. I think you still need to know what you're going to do after you get potentially shot out of the cannon. Where are you going to land? Where is it aiming, at least? Um, you know, I
Yeah.
have the image of, how that people would shoot themselves out of cannons in circus acts, thinking like, who would climb down a cannon if you didn't know
Right,
where it
right.
was going? It's like that'd be crazy. I mean, it's kind of crazy to do it at all, but still, what do you think you're getting out of this experience? That's my attitude toward psychedelics.
Well, I've never, well, I guess I did mushrooms once, but I don't know if you consider that a psychedelic. I didn't have what I would consider a psychedelic experience. So, um, my assumption would be that your mind expands or your consciousness expands and you have this experience. And then what I've heard for afterwards is that you have to reintegrate yourself. And I really don't know how that works. So I'm curious what your answers to those questions are.
I guess it depends on how disintegrated you are to begin with
Mm.
and whether you know what the pieces were. I just finished a book on writing a book on dreaming, and it's put me in a kind of dreamy state, right? Because like,
Hmm.
um, and dreams have a lot. Well, this I call this altered state work. So dream work is an altered state work. Psychedelics is trauma is definitely having a child. I mean, any of these that's traumatic. Any of these extreme things, whatever. Let's see. Well, then there's like schizophrenia. I guess that's altered state, but it's not so much work as it is a state of being for some people. But there are people with what do you call them? Emotional dysregulations who, you know, wildly vary in their state. And in a sense, life is a altered state work for them. I mean, it's a little hard for some people to get a grip on how varied their worldview is. And so psychedelics are somehow a nice tool because you can see the before and the after and the during, and you can see how far your feet are off the ground if they weren't on the ground. And so, like, you had experienced mushrooms and you hadn't a psychedelic experience. Well, okay, that could tell you that you didn't have enough mushrooms or that you're very well grounded. But, if you had enough mushrooms, most people would say it would take your feet off the ground.
Mm.
But, there are differences in dosage in mushrooms and so forth. Um, and Also, there are differences in the nature of the psychedelic experience that vary with the chemical.
Yeah, I've heard
So,
that too.
you've got things that euphorics, and you've got dark things. Most people don't take the dark things, but um, things. And we don't call them medicines. We call them poisons, like datura.
Mm.
But in India they call them psychedelics, and they use them. And I had a phase where I was trying to grow these plants because I figured, well, if they're spirits, I should like talk to them. And I'm not very good with growing things, but it was interesting because some of them they grow very differently. And I did want to take datura, and I did, and it is dangerous, and you have to be careful. And I just took enough so that I had that feeling of datura. They use it to dilate your eyes, and they use it to stop your heart and open heart surgery, and it causes certain parts of your central nervous system to shut down, and then you die if you take an overdose. So, but it's also psychedelic, so you have a far out death or something. Anyway, so I took a few grains of it to feel that pressure in my chest, and you know, that was enough. Beautiful
Mm.
plant, it's got those beautiful huge white bell flowers that just stink like a cheap perfume store every night. It's an amazing plant. But, and then, like I say, in India, they take them and they have all these stories of psychedelic experiences, but it's still considered poison. And it is. Um, but it's also a drug for certain purposes. So that was interesting. And I have other experiences of poisoning myself, which are very interesting because you start to understand historically how did people learn these things? Well, by trial and error, that's how. Um, and errors can be serious. Still, it's humorous. Science can be humorous because it's all about making mistakes, and some of the mistakes are stupid mistakes, and there's no way you learn so much, right? I can't tell you how much you learn about talking to plants when you feel like you're going to die.
Mm.
It's an altered state experience for sure, and it's very educational. It's just like as therapists, if we haven't been through some kind of trauma, how do you really understand somebody else's trauma?
Yeah.
And I say this to myself with people who are schizophrenic, and I have to answer that I don't really understand their trauma.
Hmm.
So, I'm not quite sure
Well, I
what to
like
say
kind of
about it.
the purpose going into it as like there can be benefits to altered state exploration. But if you're not sure about like what you want to get out of it and you don't really know much more than this could access something, sounds like a good time. Like it's a psychedelic and like your psyche and your awareness of yourself is actually something pretty valuable. So I like the intentional approach. And I guess what I'm kind of looping in the dream state and the different brain waves, in your experience, what is the benefit of using altered states to help people heal or understand themselves?
My simple answer is that there is no reality that's objective, and you understand that better when you see it from another point of view.
Mm. So it gets them out of the box.
I'm not sure if there's an out of the box or if there's just another box, but it gets you to different boxes. You can't really understand anything without some box. I mean, you have to have some like boundary. Where is you? If you lose all sense of where you are, that's a pretty wild psychedelic experience. I mean, I
Mm.
think that's pretty common. and it's very hard to figure out what's going on. Dreams are different. Psychedelics can really unhinge you. Dreams tend to be just like psychotic experiences where things are make no sense and people and you act in ways that are unacceptable
Yeah.
generally. But psychedelics can just blow your world apart and you just don't even know who you are anymore. So there are different kinds of experiences. It's not just a question of stronger or weaker. There are definitely different kinds of experiences. Like I say, I've never done MDMA because it's never come across my path. But they say it's a heart opening, um, a rave drug makes everybody feel great and love each other. And that's definitely an unusual experience.
Mm.
Um, Alcohol does a certain thing. Marijuana, heroin, opium. I haven't taken heroin, but my brother says it got him through architecture school. So I guess it has purposes. I mean, after all, it's just, opium poppy stuff, I think, some derivative. Um, so there has been this attitude that came from Timothy Leary, which is not the greatest place for authority, but he said, there's set and setting, and then there's integration. So now everybody talks about set and setting and integration. And then there's this whole training for therapists to be psychedelic assisted psychotherapists, which I find artificial and self-serving. But I mean, it's got to start somewhere. Okay, it's a it's another trial and error situation where people don't have a legacy or a heritage, and they're academics or intellectuals or doctors, and what do those people know about altered state work? I mean, nothing, in my opinion. But
Mm.
they build it up and they certify each other, and you can pay thousands of dollars to get a paper on the wall that says you went through some coursework. And I was involved with a school here as a volunteer. So I guess, you can sort of back your way into it as an expert, certified expert in having no experience. Um, but it's not the same as a real training with the plants or the drugs or the medicines. And if you go to cultures where it's part of the culture, it's not treated like a medicine. It's treated like, well, what we call medicine people, which again are not medicines. They're socially integrated, personal, transformative, nature, religion ceremonies.
Mm.
And we do see that in the approach towards set and setting currently, that it tends to get ceremonial. You get a nice, comfortable environment with, a track of music and a sitter to protect you and, guard against whatever, falling over and overdose. And it's not particularly religious because it's secular and scientific. And that's where it starts.
Mm.
And then you have this strange experience, which can be anything from nothing to extreme. And then afterwards, you're supposed to put it together, again, with the help of somebody who generally has no idea where you've been or what you've seen or what it would mean. And
Mm.
basically, they take you back in the Western tradition to psychotherapy. So now it's just like, oh, now you have some more experiences to draw on. Let's do psychotherapy. When did your mother start, haranguing you or something? Um, so this is the traditional, or not traditional, this is the current Western approach towards psychedelically assisted psychotherapy. Make people happy, make them comfortable, go through the experience, and then talk to them about it afterwards. And okay, um, but again, the question is, well, Has anybody asked, what do you think you're starting with? What do you think your problem is? Generally, mm, not in an unusual way. It's the same sort of questions. So it's trying to integrate this stuff into the current culture. That's what
Yeah.
we're doing.
So Alicia and I just went and saw Gabor Mate in Miami. And one of the things he talks about from the addiction lens, and he even had us raise your hands if you've been to a doctor and they ask like more about what you've experienced versus like, oh, these are your symptoms, here's a medicine. But when he talked specifically about addiction, it was trying to understand what was happening within you that was driving you towards that escape versus uh, okay, the addiction is the problem. And really, it's the wrong solution to whatever the problem is. And so there's a lot of what you're saying that like is bringing up a lot of the things that Gabor was talking about like kind of going deeper into that understanding of self to see what we're actually trying to move through.
I've been vague because I don't want to put a box around a person's experience. I don't even want to say that your addiction, if you have an addiction, is a solution to a certain problem that you can tell me about if you're open enough. I don't know. And I would also say that we're all addicted to things. It's
Right.
otherwise known as habit. We're habit creatures. It's what people do. We see patterns, we develop responses, we often forget. We don't really remember things very well, anyhow, especially from our formative childhood. And a lot of our identity goes back to our formative childhood, which could be anywhere from 10 earlier, unless you've been traumatized, in which case, any time will be a impact on you.
Yeah.
Um, so I do kind of look at everybody as somewhat addicted to something.
Hmm.
If you're not addicted to a chemical, what are the other things you're addicted to? We're addicted to our identity. We're addicted to relationships. We're addicted to money, as in security. Or I should say, we're addicted to security, money being the barter for it. And you could release all these things. So you could release your addiction to security and go off to India and live and travel or something. You could release your addiction to partnership and change your sexual preference or, do whatever. Doesn't matter. Um, but people are not going to do that. And I'm not going to suggest it.
Hmm.
I mean, I'll try to get my head around it if that's where you're going. But I've had people pretty much, coming from all different places. I have not, well, because the psychedelic thing is still new in terms of legality and protocol. I used psychedelics when it was not legal, and I used it in this country and other countries. And in some cases, I was the client, and in other cases, I was the facilitator. And I followed what's called for better or worse, a shamanic approach, which is a sort of open, rhythmic, musical, um, long, a whole night rather than, you know, charging by the hour kind of thing. And I like that model. It's open and it's accepting. I did it with people from different cultures. Everybody went to their own places. And I think that's a good model, but it doesn't quite fit yet in the professional charge by the hour, I'm the expert model.
Right.
So, the medicine person is not a doctor. If you approach a shaman and say, you have depression, can they cure you? They'll laugh at you. That's not their role. They're a spiritual intermediary.
Mm.
And they say, if you get a disease, go see a doctor, which is fair. They're not there to give you an answer or to solve your problem. They're there to make something happen, or depending on what their culture is, call the spirits in to make something happen. Um, and they're hard to pin down, and they're generally lighthearted, and they seem kind of childish and in their own world. So I feel that is sort of what I'd like to be, or I'd like to appear to be. I'd like to invite you out of your world to see yourself more broadly and, get out of your box and see that amazingly you're still in another box. You know, and, if you
Right.
want to get out of all your boxes, then you're just a sort of a drooling idiot. Well, I wouldn't say idiot because that sort of has a stigma. You're a drooling, unhinged person looking at reality from the outside. And you can see, and this is pretty typical from a psychedelic experience that does that to you, that there's no future to looking at reality as if you have no role in it, as if you're a, disembodied spirit looking down on your world. As a human being, you have to have a place in the world. You have to have some identity, some presentation, some sense of value and purpose. And to see what it's like not to have those things can be greatly liberating, educational, transformative. And that's one of the potentials of a psychedelic experience. So I try to do that with hypnosis, and you can to a certain degree, depending on how open a person is. So if a psychedelic is like somebody attaching a rocket to their back and lighting the fuse, a hypnagogic or hypnotherapeutic experience is where you have to walk yourself out. You have to let yourself go and, in a sense, imagine your way into an altered state, which I like that a lot. Not everybody can do it, some more quickly than others, but almost everyone can eventually get there with work, trust. Um, I was dealing with a guy last week, and I kept trying to take him to these imaginary places, and he kept putting in old memories. He kept going back to some old thing he knew, and I kept trying to say, forget about the old memories. You know, so instead of being with your mother, now you are your mother.
Mm.
So like, let's break, let's shake it up here a little bit. But he kept going back to what he remembered and how he remembered it. And okay, so you can see that that would be a practice. You could get better at it. Sort of like art class. You could eventually finger paint your way into a psychedelic experience. But everybody does what they're ready to, and I kind of consider myself the mule. I will drag you forward, but you have to have some sort of guidance. I will know not to step off the edge of a cliff, which you might not know if you were in a altered state. So I will not let you go there. I mean, I've had people approaching traumatic experiences. I don't know if they were real memories or if they were making them up, but I would say, no, we're not going to go there. We'll go somewhere else. Um, that's my role, and I'll take them forward. This is hypnotherapy again,
Hmm.
and I would do somewhat the same thing, perhaps, with a psychedelic. I'm not sure. I would go by the shamanic model, which is very light. They squirt agua caliente or rose scented perfume over you, and they bat you with a feather, and they sing songs and turn out the lights, and they don't talk to you about your mother or your trauma.
Mm.
um, so that seems wise to me. But then again, you've got people coming who expect something. They expect transformative experience.
Hmm.
Well, so this is what I do. I use hypnosis to give you the transformative experience because you have to walk your way into it. And I encourage or discourage the use of psychedelics, depending on how emphatic you are. If you're very emphatic, I would discourage you and say you should learn what you're doing. And if you're hesitant, I would encourage you and say there's potential here. Maybe it will be helpful to you. And most people hear about it these days because they think it's going to be helpful to them. That's the radar that it's showing people. It's being called a medicine.
Do you do the shamanic night experiences with people or no?
Not anymore because now I'm, certified as a therapist, and they don't let you do that. It's kind of against the rules at the moment, unless you're in a research role. So no, I'll educate people, and I won't encourage them because I'm not really allowed to do that. But they don't need that encouraging. You can buy mushrooms through the mail, and I will talk to you about dosages and preparation and what you might expect. But I won't facilitate it, which is kind of too bad because you really should have somebody around. Things can happen. The smoke alarm can go off. They can burn the toast, and you have to be reactive. And somebody should be able to know where the light switch is, because in an extreme psychedelic experience, you don't know where the light switch is, and you can't tell up from down, and you can't even walk straight. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to have somebody around. I guess I would encourage you to have a partner around or a friend, a sitter.
I mean, I
I don't
definitely
do it at this
encourage
point.
that. Yeah. Just because, I mean, if you're going to put yourself in a altered state of mind, making sure you're not doing something dangerous or just, I mean, I feel like we've all had the moment where we've been drunk and burnt the mac and cheese in the microwave,
Yeah,
right? And that's just drunk,
yeah.
which is something people are extremely familiar with. So when it's something unfamiliar, yes,
Well, but the
get your
point is,
mind.
you're trying to go as far as you can. So why have a seatbelt holding you back?
Bring a buddy.
Bring a buddy. Right. So
Um,
that's the lesson I would. I mean, that's where we are right now.
yeah.
Unless you're going to pay, $500 for a ketamine experience at a lab where they just sit there and watch the clock and send you out after whatever they do, which is not as much as it could be or should be, and it's sort of crass.
Yeah, you
So,
mentioned making the experience sort of clinical. And Laura and I also went to see Bessel van der Kolk, who was talking about his work with psychedelics. And he was saying all kinds of interesting things about it, that the smartest people he knows have done psychedelics, and that it works faster than any other treatments. But when I looked up his research, because I was curious, he's doing 8-hour trips with people. And I thought, well, how the heck are we supposed to replicate that in our practices? Who's paying for 8 hours with their therapist? You know what I mean?
Right.
well, traditionally, it was a group thing, and there was one facilitator, and there were 20 people, and that's sort of what I see. The ketamine experiences with here in British Columbia. There you have. Well, I wasn't actually a facilitator, but I got the impression that they had several people for two facilitators, maybe five people, so that they were sort of following that model. And I think that's the answer, that if 10 people contribute, then an 8-hour experience is affordable.
Yeah.
But if 10 people don't contribute, then it's a $3,000 experience and very few people can afford it.
Yeah.
Right. That makes sense, I guess. If you put it in more of like that group environment, which to your point is kind of how it was originally intended, I suppose, or at least
Right.
historic.
But see, the psychotherapeutic model is one-on-one, and so you have to change that model.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
if it's not one-on-one, then what are you doing there? And the answer is, well, we're just sitting there. Well, no, it's not just enough to just sit there. You do have a role, even if your training doesn't tell you what the role is. There's more than just turning on the light and leading people to the bathroom.
Right.
There is a creation of you're creating the altered state, even if you're not telling people what's in it. You're creating a container. And there is no training that I've seen yet for how to create a container in the Western model.
Hmm.
Because what's the Western model? It's like the nuclear family. That's not the container we're talking about for a psychedelic experience.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Thinking about a handful of clients of mine who've like gone through like this 8 session model of one of the psychedelics. They've done different clients of mine have tried different medicines, if we want to go with that. And but how they explained it to me was like they worked with this therapist or whoever it was for I think 8 weeks individually without any psychotherapy or without any psychedelics, and then they started to kind of get have a session, and then they would have like a month of regular check-ins and then another session. So they kind of did it like over a 6 month period with regular one-on-one therapy. Have you heard much about that model?
No, but I would endorse that. That sounds good. That gives room for education and preparation. And I mean, still, it sounds expensive. I don't know how they're spending 8 hours with their client at night. So that question still has to be answered. And maybe they're paying $4,000, and you know,
I think the dragging it out was kind of like seeing your therapist weekly. So I think I would have to ask these specific individuals, but my understanding based on what they shared, because I also asked about price, was that their therapy was their normal price that they would pay weekly, but then on the day of the dose, it was just a bigger um, investment for that one session. So then
mhm.
it didn't feel as impossible from a financial standpoint, I suppose.
Well, there's still a lot of questions about insurance and
For sure. Yeah.
legality and professional practice, scope of practice, all that stuff, which haven't yet been answered. In general, as I say, in a research context, they do that, but that's extremely expensive even in a research context to get insurance. I mean, of course. Um, so it doesn't make it cheaper, in fact. So the question remains, how to do the actual experience. Mm, yeah. So right now, as I say, I'm just saying, get yourself a sitter and good luck getting the medicine. You
Yeah.
know, hope you get, don't buy it on the street and so forth and so on. And I would also say this is actually something useful, practical. Take it at a small dose and work your way up to find out what the dose is that you want. If you've never even been there, for God's sakes, what are you doing taking this stuff? And nobody knows, especially if it's an organic thing like a mushroom. They say the potency of mushrooms has gone up like tenfold in the last 20 years. So don't use old data to titrate your experience. Actually do it. Put the mushroom in a coffee grinder and get a little kitchen scale and measure it off and be a scientist. If it's supposed to be 2 grams, take zero point 0.2 grams. And your kitchen scale won't go down to zero point 0.2 grams. So you get it at 2 grams and then you divide it into a tenth. And you boil it in a tea and you take it and you see what it feels like. And it won't feel the same. But at least you'll have some grounds for what's going on. And so what I'm saying could be considered illegal advice, depending on where you are. I mean, where are mushrooms legal these days? Colorado, Oregon, and maybe nowhere else? I don't know. I
Yes.
mean, I can get them through the mail, and probably everyone else can too, but that doesn't make them legal. So, then what would happen if your house burned down, and would you be taken to court as a drug violator? It's not a good scene yet. It's so I'm very ambivalent. I much prefer go to another country where it's legal
Yeah.
Have a vacation. They're great vacations. Go to Costa Rica or Peru and see the jungle. It's a fabulous place. Um, and go where you can get some amount of trust because you can't be certain unless you do some homework. Um, and have one of those experiences. And it's not going to be cheap, but it's not going to be much more than a regular vacation. Mostly the hotels and the airplane travel, because they don't need to charge you $4,000 for an evening because uh, you know, they're not therapists, and there's a group of 20 people. So that remains my advice if you want to. And then we're talking about a shamanic experience because you're going to a shamanic culture. Then you should do some anthropology, do some study about what culture you're going into. At least I find it interesting. Um, you can't really know, but it's interesting. These are quite different cultures that have used these things traditionally. Um,
Um, what types of, so I owned a wellness spa for a little while, and that was a really interesting experience because a lot of the people that had attracted as employees were talking about this kind of stuff with me, and I was like, I was I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so
mhm,
they had to fill me in on a lot of things, I guess you could say. And you're saying, experiment, kind of get your body familiar with and work your way up to something. Like, from what I've been told, there's like frog poisoning, and then there's ayahuasca, and then there's DMT. Like, uh, what would you recommend? Oh, and then there's like the studies from the 1970s where they were doing LSD.
mhm.
What, which experience do you think is something people, or does that matter depending on what their goals are?
Yeah, it's funny. LSD has gotten popular again. It used to be like a swear word. It used to be, like heroin. People are now microdosing LSD. I guess you can get it through the mail. But I would say the answer is that those Western chemicals don't have a tradition. There is no tradition for the administration of LSD or DMT in its pure chemical form. Um, so if you want something with a tradition, with a background, and then you go to the shamanic tradition, since that's the tradition. It's not a uniform tradition. It's slightly different from a Western point of view. Um, from the indigenous point of view, I suppose it's very different. If you were to go to Siberia versus Central America, it'd be very different for them. But for us, it would be, just strange guys dressed up in colorful costumes dancing around in the dark. We wouldn't know the difference. But and it may not be any different to you if that's all you see. So um, I would say you're going to take a traditional experience, which I guess means, I guess there are mushroom experiences. Mushrooms are much easier than ayahuasca. So Gabor Mate was involved with ayahuasca and he got in trouble. Um, I don't know what was Besser Vendel Cook administering? MDMA or something?
That's what his most recent research was on, but he seemed to be suggesting that he's tried different types of psychedelics. I thought he was
Oh,
LSD for sure, but I don't know, Laura, if you got that same impression.
I don't remember, if I'm being very
well,
honest.
there's
I have to
breath
look
work.
back at
Remember,
the
there's breath work. Not to
I'll
forget breath work,
see you
right?
about that.
breath work.
Breath
Yeah,
work was to fill in, and it's still an interesting way into an altered state experience.
I
It's
totally agree.
cheaper, safer, not as extreme, sort of therapeutic oriented, but more exploratory. It's not considered a therapy,
Hmm.
but I think it could be used that way. Um, so I would say, you know, these psychedelic lodges or psychedelic tourism, whatever it's called, Um,
Like
pretty much offer mushrooms or ayahuasca. I don't know. Am I missing something? I mean,
MDMA, LSD. Are
I don't
those
know, but I mean, not in a
I know what's wrong.
shamanic context. I mean, maybe somebody's offering those in a foreign country, but I don't know. So if those are your options, let's just say those are your options, mushrooms or ayahuasca. So ayahuasca should be described. It's an interesting combination of different chemicals, has a tradition, Northern South America, and uh, it's a DMT related, but it's very different because it's through your digestive system, not through your directly into your blood. So it's not really clear what your brain is getting in the end. But it's a pretty intense and physically demanding experience. And a few people have died who were not uh, properly screened.
mm,
So, you know, and it's a pretty, it has it's like going to the dentist. If you have Novocaine, the dentist isn't so bad. And so ayahuasca is not so bad because it's an anesthetic in addition to all its other things. But if you recall, as an ayahuasca participant, what you went through, the joke is how many times do people take ayahuasca for entertainment? And the answer is once. Because, it's very intense on your system and it is exhausting and draining and dehydrating.
mm,
Um, and if you're anesthetized, it's not so bad because by the time it wears off, you think, "Oh, I remember, I ended up falling down in the shower and shitting on myself and laughing. It's like, okay, well, that's funny. Um, but if you weren't in that state, it wouldn't have been funny.
right.
So,
I've heard
so
this
ayahuasca is a
term, by
little
the way.
intense, and like I say, a couple of people died because they really shouldn't have been there in the first place. They were on medication and they had heart trouble, and that's not what you don't do that kind of stuff.
Right,
And
right.
nobody was, so you can't depend on the shaman to look
Mm,
at your pharmaceutical history and tell you if it's appropriate.
mm.
So, in a sense, mushrooms are safer, I think. I've never heard of anybody really going overboard with mushrooms, even with a heroic dose. But it's a very different experience. Very different. I wouldn't say a world of difference, but very different. I've
Hmm.
never had a similar experience in those two chemicals. And I've never been in a shamanically facilitated mushroom experience. All my mushroom experiences have been my own,
Mm.
take them and go walk in the woods. Um, and so I think in the current environment, legally and what's available, you can go to these expensive research-oriented or well, ketamine is available legally because it's off-label, administered by an anesthesiologist legally. But then, is that what you want? It's like going to the dentist but not getting any dentistry, just getting the anesthetic.
Hmm.
Like, are they actually going to help you? Because in most of what I hear about ketamine clinics, they don't really help you. They just sit with you. But then that's sort of all the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is turning out to be at the moment. They just sit with you. And then they may do therapy afterwards or before. That's great. But if you're just going to the clinic for the experience, it's often not required that you have either of those things. And then you may be left in a disoriented state. That's probably the danger there, is that you're left in a disoriented state, not
Yeah.
knowing what to do. And it's not a minor thing. You can be really,
Yeah. The
put in a
integration.
paranoid, upset state of mind.
I mean, if you think about it, like you're stepping outside of like your known way of existing, and then you're coming back to and expect to just keep living, and all the old neurons and everything is still there, but you just have this whole wild experience that now doesn't completely integrate. It is very unsettling and body system, but also like to your point, having more of the uh, therapeutic supportive hand to understand how to integrate it. I definitely see the value in that.
But remember, you may not have that neural system that you started with. It may not be there when you come back. I mean,
Exactly, which makes it more threatening.
absolutely. I mean,
Right.
this is, neuroplasticity at its finest.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I do remember, and Alicia, correct me if I screw this up, but at the conference when they were talking about psychedelics, wasn't there something about PTSD? They were talking specifically like with veterans and how certain psychedelics were being really helpful. Am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah.
Do
Yeah, that
you,
Vanderkolk's work is mostly with veterans, I believe.
yes. Have you seen, read, know anything about that, Lincoln?
Um, Seen, read, and know, but that doesn't really mean that I know much. So I have a friend in Texas who says that they're just working on getting iboga as a treatment for PTSD, and that's another chemical. I don't know about iboga because it's actually so powerful that nobody wanted to play with it. But now they're getting a pharmaceutical control, and I don't know how they approach it as a psychedelic assisted thing or just as a chemical remediation for addiction and trauma. I don't know, but I'm surprised to hear that they're taking it to a national level now, trying to get it reduced to Schedule 2, I think. Or is it Schedule 3, whichever. I can't remember which is. Schedule 4 is the illegal one. Schedule 3 is better. Anyway, they're working on it. And, they tried to do that with MDMA last year. It didn't work because they said their data wasn't good enough. So these people are going at it at a higher level. And the administration is now more open to them. So it's a good chance that something will happen with ibogaine. And I don't know about that. I just sort of hear about it remotely. Um, I don't know how it's being administered. Wait, so what's the question here? Yes, you should, coming to the end of the hour, you should educate yourself. You should speak to people who have done what you think you're going to do, what you're planning to do. You should, if you have a problem, so, again, going back to the beginning of this talk, I have people who come with problems that feel that they're the problem and they need healing, and other people who come to me with problems that feel that other people have other problems and they need to manage the situation. So, what is your problem? You don't have to have a good answer, you just have some answer because you are ultimately directing yourself, especially in a psychedelic experience. Similar in hypnotherapy, similar in dream work. You can prepare yourself and direct yourself, and you can't offload that responsibility entirely.
Mhm.
I don't care whether you're dealing with a shaman or a psychotherapist, it's still your responsibility to draw the line, define the box, set the goal, put your feet on the ground or take your feet off the ground and flap your wings or whatever. You have to do something. The chemical will take you, but like getting shot out of a cannon, you still have to aim it. You still need to have some kind of aim. So that's the educational. It's more than just set and setting and nice music and plants and, comfortable couch. It's intention and maybe some therapeutic work to get in touch with your emotions, to be a little more engaged when you lose touch with your emotions. So, it's not a one or the other type thing. Like I say, it's nested boxes. You're not quite sure what the next box is going to be when you get out of this one. So you want to get some idea. Imagine the box, imagine several boxes, imagine your childhood, imagine what you want. Um, and I've had people in psychedelic experiences who didn't go anywhere. They just curled up into a fetal position and stayed there. And that's an option. If you feel that's the safest place, fine. Maybe you feel you wasted your money, but maybe you didn't. Maybe now you know something you didn't know before.
Mm.
So, and then, some of my most experienced facilitators have had bad psychedelic experiences and felt really screwed up for months. They didn't expect it. So they did their preparation and they were careful, but stuff came up even in the best of times, which was, threw them out of all their boxes and left them needing therapy. So you may need that too. So it would be nice if you had a resource to go to, like a therapist or a counselor, whatever you want to call them, even a coach, right? So somebody who could be grounded where you don't have to be.
Mm.
Now I feel like, is that a wrap up? I'm not sure.
I think it
I
works.
think, oh, yeah.
I think it works for sure. I do appreciate your insights, and I think it's worth noting that breath work and hypnosis, well, I don't know what your take on it is, but hypnosis from my perspective can be free. I'm trained in hypnosis as well, and there's many YouTube videos that can walk you through a hypnosis. Is it going to be you make it your experience, like you were saying. So um, those are free things to get into an altered state of mind to help yourself. And then if you feel the need for whatever problem you're facing, you have other options as well.
Hmm.
What I do for hypnosis in this regard is I do a 4 hour session, which I call past life regression, because that sounds weird. Um, and in 4 hours, you'd go pretty far. So, but not everybody goes to the same extent. And the whole thing gets recorded and transcribed. And it's interesting. It's kind of like a little biography because you talk about your childhood, you talk about your future, you talk about your relationships, and it's all written down. It's like a 50-page book. And you generally, that's an unusual opportunity. I
Yeah.
mean, if you're think of what your children and grandchildren will say when they read this thing someday. It's pretty unusual, and it can be pretty far out because my role as a facilitator is to make it far out. And if you go there or not, that's up to you. Like I said, I had a client who kept going back to memories. It's like, okay, but let's take it the next level. But he preferred to go back to memories. Okay. Um, some people can get very creative and become plants or dolphins on other planets and stuff like that. And it's amazing stuff. I mean, hypnosis is like dream work. It's like you really feel like you're there. It's not just a story anymore. It's an
Hmm.
experience. And so it gets to the level of psychedelics. There used to be something called hypnodelics, which sort of petered out when things became illegal. I don't know why it petered out, but it did.
I just
Um,
training recently that was EMDR, which is a hypnosis derivative,
yeah,
and ketamine together. So maybe making a return.
yeah, great. I suppose yeah, could be. Depends on the facilitator and the people. So, do your homework and get prepared and yes, invest in it. Like they say, don't cheap out on parachutes and brain surgeons. Don't do the budget version. It's going to cost something, and it's going to be worth something.
Yeah.
Oh, last thing, the most important thing in therapy is often said to be the relationship you have with your therapist, and I sort of contradict that. It's the relationship you have with yourself.
Mm, love that. That's a great one. That is exactly where I want to be right there. That's
Yeah.
perfect.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing this information with us, and thank you for doing the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you for being so open and transparent and like not boxing things in, but really letting people discover what might be right for them and think about it because there's nothing wrong with wanting to, explore altered states, but to be educated in how to keep yourself safe and connect with that person within yourself. I love coming home to that space. So thank you so much for just the openness that you provided.
Oh, sure. Well, send them to my website and tell them to read stuff.
You got it. That is exactly what we will do.
Okay.
All right, thank
Thanks.
you.
Thanks.